my premise overall when I talk about age in theater is that we really do act our age, that age is a performance, right? But that it is also a
Mm.
performative, we can go there, but it's a performance, and that sense of performance is nowhere more evident than on the modern stage. That's where we really look at someone and watch them perform age consciously, whereas we're actually all performing age unconsciously all the time.
That was the voice of Dr. Valerie Lipscomb, professor of English at the University of South Florida, Sarasota Manatee campus, and my guest today on the Page and Stage podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon. Before diving into my conversation with Valerie, I want to give a big shout out to Alitu. Alitu is the all-in-one online podcasting app that I use to put this show together. Doing this show is one of the wildest and best decisions I've ever made, but it literally would not exist without Alitu. And if you're thinking about maybe starting up a podcast of your own, I cannot recommend Alitu highly enough. See, I'd been thinking of doing a podcast for a few years, but never had the time to figure out all the technical and audio stuff. Alitu does all of it. You just upload your audio and boom, it converts the files, levels the volumes, reduces the background noise, does all the other magical mixing stuff. It even has automatic editing filters for awkward pauses and those pesky ums and ers. Alitu even includes a free music library and hosting. There are even more bells and whistles, but I want to get on with the episode. So check out the show notes and use the link there to learn more about Alitu and maybe even sign up. Now, let me tell you more about my guest, Dr. Valerie Lipscomb. As I mentioned, Valerie is a professor of English at the USF Sarasota Manatee campus, where she teaches American and modern British literature. Her 2016 book, Performing Age in Modern Drama, was the first monograph to examine age and aging as performance in contemporary plays. Her co-edited collection of essays, Staging Age, The Performance of Age in Theater, Dance, and Film, also was published by Palgrave Macmillan, a world-class British academic and trade publishing company headquartered in London. Valerie's numerous articles on age and drama have appeared in such journals as Modern Drama, the International Journal of Aging and Later Life, and Age, Culture, Humanities. She also regularly presents papers at international and national conferences on literature, theater, and age studies. Her PhD is from the USF Tampa campus with concentrations in modern literature and teaching composition. Valerie has chaired the executive committee of the Modern Language Association Age Studies Forum and is on the governing council of the North American Network in Aging Studies. To sum it all up, when it comes to age on the stage, Dr. Lipscomb knows what she's talking about. And after this episode, not only will you be able to pick up on all the weird casting decisions in plays, TV shows, and movies, but you'll be more aware of how you perceive and perform age in your day-to-day life. Here we go, with my conversation with Valerie Lipscomb. Well, everyone, welcome back to the Page and Stage podcast. After a few minutes of fighting the evil sound gremlins, I am finally online with Dr. Valerie Lipscomb, who I have known for, I was trying to remember, Valerie, is it like 8-9 years now?
Probably close. It's probably going on 10 from when
10, yeah.
when that project started way back until
Yeah,
I had the delight of meeting you. Yes.
we will definitely talk about that. But for everyone out there, this is going to be a really, really great episode because we're going to talk about stuff we don't usually talk about. But let's start with this. Dr. Lipscomb, you have been on sabbatical for this last year? How long have you been
I've been on sabbatical for the past year, which sounds like such a great luxury. In the state of Florida university system where I work, they will allow you to go on sabbatical every 7 years, and you could take a full year if you're just willing to go half pay.
Wow. Okay, so you're still getting half pay just to drink pina coladas by the pool? What have you been doing for the last year?
That is exactly what the state of Florida wants me to do with my sabbatical time. Well, and instead of that, as disappointing as that would be for them, I have finished up publication for the biggest project of my life, which was to be lead editor of the Palgrave Handbook of Literature and Aging. Palgrave is a major academic publisher, and count them 6 years ago, they came to me and said, we'd like to do a new work on the intersection of literature and age studies, and would you please edit it? So that's what I've been working on for 6 years. My elevator speech on that is new research, 200,000 words, more than 30 authors across 3 continents, and 6 years of my soul. So,
So either
during a pandemic,
congratulations or I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
well, and during a pandemic. So, I mean, great
Yes.
laud to all of my contributors and my wonderful co-editor, Akia Swinnen at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands, because everyone just kept at it during some of the most difficult situations anyone's ever encountered. So we're very, very proud of
Great.
it. But also, yes, it finished up. And, and I've done a couple of I did a quick trip to New York. I like to do some research in the theater on film and tape archive there. So, shout out to the New York Public Library for letting me see all kinds of taped productions and getting to write about them. Stuff like that. I wrote things. I wrote things. I went places. It's what I'm supposed to do.
Exactly what sabbatical is for. And I put the cart a little bit in front of the horse here. Give everyone your quick nutshell bio. Like, what are your degrees in, and where do you teach? Where do you work?
Okay. So I am a professor of English at the University of South Florida, which has 3 campuses, the main one in Tampa. There's also one in St. Pete, and my favorite one, which is in Sarasota, right
Hey-o.
there, 10 minutes from 4 of the best professional theater companies around. And my degrees, I got an English degree from the University of Iowa, go Hawkeyes, a very, very long time ago. Yes. And people always asked if I was part of the writer's workshop there. I was not. I am not a creative writer myself. However, I did end up as a character in one of their stories. I'll never tell.
Oh my goodness.
That's my closest brush with fame for the writer's workshop. Then I finished the master's degree in humanities, a comparative arts program, and then the PhD in English, which my focus all along has been in drama, all the way back, but drama from a literary perspective. I teach primarily literature, so British and American lit, mostly all of the subject of drama, all of the genre of drama, but British and American lit primarily the last couple hundred years.
Okay, and all those degrees are at Iowa?
No, the other 2 were from the University of South Florida. It's really unusual. I have a very unusual career path, so it's very unusual to get degrees from the place where you end up teaching. But they fell into place.
I was just going to say, I tried to do that and it didn't work out.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I often say that my career path is nothing short of miraculous. I'm just grateful for it because there are hundreds and hundreds of people who deserve to be doing what I do and didn't get to. And it is just a whole bunch of luck. So right place, right time, over and over and over again.
Better lucky than good, as they used to say, right?
Yeah, right.
So let's
be both.
Before we get into your niche topic, which is how you and I even met in the first place, talk about what drew you to literature and drama. Why was that what you chose to invest so many years in?
Oh, drama, literature and drama. I mean, that was from when I saw my first children's theater production when I was 6. Then,
wow. Tell me about that.
My sisters are much older. My siblings are all quite a bit older than I am. And my sister took me to watch some of her friends in her high school theater production, which was a kid's production. They took me backstage afterwards. I realized there was not actually a Princess Castle. And that's it. I was hooked. I wanted to do it. I wanted to do that, be involved somehow. Ever since, I was blessed to be in a very, very good high school for performing for theater specifically. Our theater director was amazing. Minored in it in college and all that. But so that focus has always been there. Literary studies. I thought originally, way, way back, I thought I wanted to be a high school teacher and direct the high school drama program, just like my wonderful mentor had. And then I did it for 2 years. Yeah. When I did that for 2 years, which was when I was 22 years old, teaching students who were from 16 to 18. 2 years of that convinced me that I did not want to do that.
Right.
And then I had a career crisis at the tender age of 24, and it took another decade for me to realize that teaching at the college level was the right thing for me. That is when I got interested in aging.
Great. Perfect pivot, Valerie. Okay, so you and I met, we're guessing maybe 10 years ago at Florida Studio Theater. I was
Mhm,
working on a project called For the Ages, and this was specifically a gerontology project. It was a project where I interviewed literally 100 people, ages 55 to 101,
mhm,
over a year, and we took the transcripts of those interviews and I curated them into two plays that FST ended up producing. The first one was called Old Enough to Know Better, Aging Well in Sarasota, and the second one was called Last Rites. What I learned interviewing all these people was that people who are mature, who
mhm.
have a high number in their age, trying to avoid the word old, because I know that's one of the things we're going to talk about.
Right.
Um, they talked to me about two things more than anything else: sex and
Mhm,
diet. They
mhm,
loved talking about those two topics. Then it was like, hair appointment shopping. I don't want to stop driving, that kind of stuff. But
mhm,
sex and death, one and two by a mile, which is why the second play, Last Rites, focused very much on end of life, dying with dignity. But both of those plays were built entirely out of the transcripts of these interviews, real people, and taking their stories and turning them into theater.
mhm.
I forget exactly how I connected with you or whether it was through Dr. Kathy Black. You
It was.
probably remember better than I do because I was working production, but somehow you got involved and you became one of the most invaluable witnesses, observers, and consultants on this project. Tell the listeners how you got involved in that project, what drew you to it, and we'll just start with that because it's a big story.
It is, but it was Dr. Kathy Black, my colleague in gerontology at USF, who got me involved. She knows all of the demographics of the Sarasota area really well. So she's a really great resource for you about gerontology in general and the demographics of the Sarasota area in specific. But she said Valerie needs to be part of this. So I was just delighted that you brought me in to kind of sort of watch and then also, give you some context for what you were learning from all of those interviews and just kind of be your consultant through throughout that for what would end up being, I think, just an absolutely amazing documentary play. I ended up writing about it twice, once for the
Yeah.
production and once for the evolution of the script, because it was just such a singular opportunity for me to be part of the creative process. So often, what I do as an English professor is analyze, discuss, critique, talk about everything once it's all done. so, so to be part of the
Right.
creation and be able to watch that evolve was really rewarding for me as well. I remember coming in to begin with you and the people at FST who were wonderful, who were helping you, who were also part of this project. And I remember hearing a lot of ignorance about older people at the
Yeah.
beginning and the typical stereotypes that we tend to associate with older people because almost everybody involved with the project was significantly younger. I mean, were you like one of the older people involved at the time? And like what were you like in your late 30s? I mean,
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right. I
yeah,
was in my late 30s.
I don't think you've even
We
been turned
the
40 yet.
cast, yeah, cast was much more age appropriate in terms of what we were doing. Um,
Absolutely.
but,
Once you had a
but yeah,
cast. But
yes,
that
exactly.
interview process, that early on, as you were framing things, I remember coming in and you all had interviewed someone who was quite a bit older, like right at the upper end of the age range you were interviewing. And even the choice of age range is always interesting, right? Well, we'll get there. But like when do you become old enough to know better?
Yeah,
And I remember you were all sort of enchanted with this older woman and how she had Googled something. And she had said, "Oh, yeah, I just Googled it on the Google." And that phrase stuck with you all. You all thought it was hilarious.
yep.
Um,
I
and
remember.
and you were talking about her being so cute. She was adorable, this lady. And
Yep.
I thought, okay, well, that's where we're starting from.
Yep.
But
We set it up for you.
and by the time you all were done, though, nobody was talking about anybody as being cute, and
Nope.
the learning curve was swift. You all embraced it and took it to heart so fast that I thought, well, what a pleasure to work with folks who were such quick studies in so many ways and so committed to getting it right.
Yeah. So I'm going to stick a pin in the For the Ages project. Now we'll come back. But so this is the niche. You focus on aging, ageism, representations of age on
Mm-hmm.
stage. This
Mm-hmm.
is like your bailiwick. This is what you are just expert in. And so, two-part question. Part one, how did that become your niche? How did you become interested in this particular aspect of theater? And then please talk to us about what the issues are. The big problems in representation in theater, in ageism. I mean, because ageism, there's a big meta conversation just culturally, but then specifically in theater,
Mm-hmm.
what are the
And
what
in
are the blind
narrative,
spots? What are the blind spots?
and in a
Yes.
narrative more broadly than theater, but very much theater. So how did I get interested in this? That goes back to graduate school. So I was in a wonderful doctoral seminar on Shakespeare. And from our point of view in literary studies and theater studies, I had a very hard time when it came time to decide what to do for a term paper, believing that I had anything at all fresh and new to say about Shakespeare. It is just, I mean, you can devote your entire career to studying one play in Shakespeare
Yeah.
studies. So I was
Yeah.
bemoaning that there was nothing new to say while we were studying Othello. About the time I had to come up with a topic. And as you know, Othello and Desdemona, and this is part of what we studied, of course, Othello and Desdemona are separated in many ways. Shakespeare makes them very, very different, not just by gender, but by class, by race, like where he came from, how he's achieved, what her worldview is. He's made them different in every possible way. At that time, when I was in grad school, there was all this criticism focusing on Othello as a black man, as a Moor, as someone who was separated by race from everyone around him. And I said, oh yeah, and also of course age. Othello is, the age of Desdemona's father. He's 20 years older. It isn't just racist epithets that are hurled at him. They say, and he says, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe. Right. And I said, so where's the criticism about that? And my wonderful Shakespeare mentor said, oh, there isn't any. And I said, I'm sorry, what? She's like, maybe there might be one article, maybe. And she knew. She actually had an interest in age herself. And I thought, for heaven's sake, if it hasn't been done in Shakespeare studies, then it hasn't been done anywhere in drama.
Anywhere. Yeah.
and very little in literature. And that was exactly what happened. It became my first publication. My term paper turned into my first publication. And I realized that there was a niche that also actually could really make a difference in the real world. So often what we do in the academic world is seen as just, esoteric and not really applicable to everyday life. But ageism is huge and real. And I think pointing it out in our literature, since our literature, our theater, our drama holds up a mirror to our culture and also helps shape our culture. Both of those things, right? It's both mimetic and it is also influential. That dealing with age, representations of, and ageism there can actually help, I think, change the world. So we're back on the theater can help change the world. It really it can. So I've been kind of banging the drum about that my whole career.
Yeah.
And I've never run out of anything to write about. Oh my gosh, it is such a wide open field. When it comes to age in theater, over and over and over again, I point and say, look at this over here. And people go, oh, I've never thought about that. Well, I've never thought about that.
Yeah. And I think in the cultural consciousness, it's more apt to be understood in terms of film, like the soup, especially in terms of older man, younger woman who was appropriate to look like they're married. The most recent kerfuffle was Anne Hathaway. Like people were saying Anne Hathaway is playing a mother of 41 years old in this film. And people are saying she doesn't look, that's not true. She doesn't look 41. And she literally is 41. Like, that's her actual age. She is representing her actual age. And people are saying she doesn't look that old.
Right.
Right.
What they think
So I
41
think,
should look like, what they think a
right.
41-year-old mother should look like. So that's part of what I think is so the theater and film, but theater points up is the very different ways we think about age, right? So we're talking about chronological age, 41.
Yes.
She has been alive for 41 years. But then there's also her apparent age. How does she look?
Mm.
Right. And actors, theater actors particularly, but all of them are used to this. You always have an age range that you can type yourself on.
On
Plays
your
18 to
resume. Yep.
25, right? So that
Yeah.
has to do with your apparent age, right? Then there's your physiological age, especially from like age 50 on. There's this huge range of what's actually going on with your body and whether, you are spry or you are frail, all those things. You can't just lump together older people. There's a huge range of physiological age. There's psychological age. There's emotional age. There are all these different kinds of ages, and we just kind of lump it all together.
Especially in a film or theater where so much of it, I think, is based on apparent age because
Mhm.
people are just looking at, right? That's their first clue. It's the first piece of evidence how quote unquote old that character is. It's just what they look like. I remember you mentioning this years ago, and it was in the bio you sent me too. You like to use Death of a Salesman as a really good object lesson or example here. Talk about that. Because again, I think some people are still tuning into, well, what's the big deal? Why does ageism on, first of all,
Oh,
what
well,
is ageism on the stage? And second of all, why does it matter?
so I look at Death of a Salesman because it does such a great job of showing us traditionally how we have represented age on stage. Okay. And it brings up a lot of the different, I don't know, interesting facets of it. Because, it was, 1949, Lee J. Cobb originated the role of Willie Loman. Willie, as you recall, is in his 60s in the present of that play. But there are also flashbacks to the past that aren't exactly flashbacks. They're all conjurings of Willie's mind. Miller, if I remember right, called them Willie's like daydreams. But
Yes.
Willie Willie is just suddenly in the past. Okay. And when he is suddenly in the past, it's about 15 years earlier. And at that point the action changes. He walks through walls, right? And the characters, they don't observe the conventions of the stage in the same way. But aside from that, there is not much physical alteration when Willie, Linda, Biff, Happy all step back into 15 years before. They all physically look pretty much the same. Sometimes the boys are in a sweater carrying a football. Maybe Linda might put on a hair bow. Okay.
Right.
But what that shows us is that we have a longing for an essential self, an ageless self, something that does not change, right? That there's some core of us that is the same, at least in Willie's mind, because everything we see about the past is conjuring of Willie's mind. So Willie was in his 60s. Lee J. Cobb was 37 years old when he originated that.
Oh, man.
And very, very typically, the person cast as Willie is significantly younger than Willie in his 60s. And oftentimes it didn't for years get mentioned at all whether someone was appropriately cast by age. Eventually, finally, when Philip Seymour Hoffman was cast, then there was actual news coverage like, oh, I wonder if he's the right age to play Willie Loman. And I'd gone through a ton of newspaper clippings before I ever saw anybody say anything about that. If I remember right, Brian Dennehy also was about the right age to play
Yes.
Willie when he was cast, and he was about the only one
Yeah.
who would be the
I
right
saw him.
chronological age.
I actually got to see Brian Dennehy in that production. He was magnificent.
And I
Why do you
got to see
think
the New
it's
York Theater on film and tape archived.
very cool? Very cool.
That's about it for that. But yeah, so it brings up, how do we cast people at various ages? How does theater as a convention just say, oh, okay, now you're going to play older. Now you're going to play younger. Now you just step back 15 years. Maybe you'll hunch over a little bit more. That is the only thing you need to do. So, my premise overall, when I talk about age in theater, is that we really do act our age, that age is a performance, right? But that it is also a
Mm.
performative, we can go there, but it's a performance, and that sense of performance is nowhere more evident than on the modern stage. That's where we really look at someone and watch them perform age consciously, whereas we're actually all performing age unconsciously all the time. And then it's not
This
just
is
about how old you are. It's not just about the older end of the spectrum. When we talk about ageism, we're primarily talking about ageism against older people. But we're all aging. All of us. We all have an age. We all are all performing an age, and that age changes constantly, right? I say, oh my gosh, I just got older. Oh, look.
it's happening in real time. You remind me of I was in a production of Sound of Music in my 20s. And to save money and everything else, I was double cast. Well, I was actually triple cast. And I'll never forget this. I went on stage, had my quick little scene, ran downstairs, and I had about 30 minutes to do a full transformation into my next character, who was, remember, I'm in my 20s.
Yes.
I'm playing a character in his 70s. This is
Sure.
in a professional theater. This is not university, where in university you can understand a little bit more why someone would cast outside ages because you're trying to get your students experience. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a professional theater. And I remember I had makeup classes about how to, it was aging makeup. That was the name of it, right? The lines and the shadows
Mm-hmm.
and how you do this and the crow's feet and this. And I'm
I did
downstairs
too.
painting my
Mm-hmm.
face
Mm-hmm.
to come back up, grab a cane, and take really small steps and talk in a different voice and play old. Back then, it didn't even occur to me that it was a problem or a thing. And once I met you, though, I remember thinking about that, like, wow, what does that mean? Like, what did I do?
Right. I mean,
This was part of our steep learning curve with the project, right? Is like just the self-awareness of, wait a minute, that makes a statement of some kind, and
it
probably not the
does.
kind you want to make.
It does. And I think you're right that we take that convention of younger playing older very much unquestioned, because I mean, I'd like to tend to attribute it to college actor training programs where you really do have a whole play to cast with 18 to 22-year-olds, or maybe you'll bring in the grad students and we're up to 26 or so. And you cast everybody that way, and we take it for granted. Therefore, we continue to take for granted that you can cast young for old, whereas other categories of identity make headlines if you cross gender
Yeah.
casting, if you cross race, if it's cross racial casting, if it's casting, against all kinds of apparent categories of identity, but not age. That's still that convention sticks around. And I think it really is just one of the small indications that ageism, which is endemic in our society, I mean, it runs rampant, and it is considered kind of the last acceptable ism. Most of us, we live in an ageist society. Most of us participate. Very few people are resistant to it. We don't even know we're doing it. Kind of the way sexism was when I was a little kid, right? I mean, they told blonde jokes and I was just supposed to not care. Well, we've got our over the hill birthday cards. Have you bought one? I have, right? Have you ever yelled at the little old lady driver in the left lane going slow? Right? I mean, we are in an ageist society. We don't get to escape it once we're aware of it, but I hope that awareness can help everyone having something to do with the theater or with writing to kind of start examining really how they characterize any particular age, for that matter. It isn't just older people, but we tend to stigmatize the older even more.
Yes. I'm going to pivot into the way you work with playwrights. When I was dramaturging especially a lot of younger characters, adults trying to write young characters just sound so fake. They
Hmm.
didn't vet it with their niece or whatever, you know what I mean? But you are not wrong that the more common direction is up. It's to judge the elder. I would love for you to talk a little bit about when you work with playwrights, because I know you've told me these stories and I saw it in your prep as well, that playwrights will have kind of a little epiphany moment of, I didn't even realize I had done XYZ with that line or that character description. What are kind of the biggest blind spots that playwrights have when it comes to writing age into their characters?
I think, and again, I'm generalizing, of course, but I think we tend to be produced when we are younger, right? The older playwrights don't get much of a chance to get started, and they're younger writing about older people when they have not had the experience of being older, but they
Yeah,
think they understand it because they've seen older people. Or and then they won't do the actual, that same kind of, you said vet it with your niece, right? Well, okay, whom do you have in your life who is older that you can draw on for real and not just go on the aging stereotypes or the aged stereotypes? So they writing older people almost always as minor characters, right? They are nothing but secondary characters in a more important story,
yeah,
right? And they also they tend to rely on the stereotypes having to do with the most frail older people. One of the
yeah,
things about lumping everyone together as being old is that we have like 3 generations alive at once who are all lumped together as old, right? If you start at
right.
age 50, I don't know how you're feeling about that, Jason. If we start starting people at age 50 and up, you're not
It's
there.
coming. It's
You're not
coming.
there yet. But if you're lucky enough, you get there, right? So 50, so we've got the characterization of there being the young old and then the older old. And almost all of our stereotypes having to do with older people are actually collected about that very, very last stage of life where we may experience actual frailty, whether that's cognitive or a physical frailty. And then we lump everybody over 50 into that category. People have a
Right.
huge range of experience at that stage of life too, right? Like, I don't consider myself to be the same generation as someone who's 95. That
Yeah,
person's old enough to be my parent, right? So,
yeah.
and I'm 64. Our our culture, I just turned 64. I called it my Beatles birthday, right? I made people sing to me. But and I'm supposed to do everything in my power to make sure you don't know that I'm
Right.
64.
You're
That
supposed
should
to
be the
hide it or
very
be
last
ashamed
thing.
of it.
Oh my gosh, yes. I am defying it. I'm resisting it. I'm hiding it. Right. Sorry, I got off track. So, but
That's
what do
great.
they do? That's one of the things they do wrong. So those stereotypes, like, who do you know who's older? How and how could you possibly write those if you don't know anybody? If you're really that isolated, so do something about
Yeah.
that. But also, don't tell me how the older person you know is oh, not like, oh, my, this person's different, right? This person that I know, that's not really what old is like. Well, yes, it is, right? This is what 64 or 41 or whatever looks like. And then what else is there that they tend to do besides marginalize people and draw them with
There's a lot of
stereotypes and give them canes and shawls. In
yeah.
addition to the canes and the shawls, they also give them plots that go one branch or the other. One is your older person is comic relief, right? And we're
Yeah.
going to have a joke about depends, or or losing your teeth, or one of those really crass, ridiculous jokes. Or the narrative is just tragic.
Yeah.
It's decline, it's decay. A noted age studies scholar named Margaret Morgenroth Goulet identified this as a master narrative of aging. I don't know, ages ago. She's kind of one of our foundational critics. But that this it's always about decay, decline, and death. And that is not the only way to talk about older people and what is going on with them. while your folks that you interviewed wanted to talk about sex and death, they didn't necessarily talk all day about how they were declining, right?
No, quite the opposite. More often than not, it was, I don't recognize that person in the mirror. Or I don't feel. I remember one of my favorite quotes was from a guy who said, "Who are you going to cast me with?" And I was like, "Well, we're playing with the captain, probably someone age appropriate." And he's like, "Look, I'm 70, but cast me with someone who's 50 because that's how old I feel." Like
Mhm.
he wanted to put a
Exactly.
50-year-old on stage to represent him because that's how he actually felt. I found
Yeah,
that
and you
fascinating.
did we did have a mixed age cast, which I thought was great because what he expressed was extremely common among older people.
Yes,
There's a
absolutely.
point at which you look in the mirror and don't recognize that person because you don't feel any different. That's that sense of the ageless self that I was talking about earlier, that we really need to acknowledge that at any point we are the sum total of all of our ages. I am every age I've ever been. Okay. And so, with that in mind, you should be able to cast older people to play younger. I've at least
Yeah,
been that age, darn it,
yeah.
as opposed to casting younger for older all the time when they haven't actually experienced that age yet. Not that I'm saying you have to have experience in order to portray something, you don't, but we do make that assumption way too often. Right, and that's why I loved Kimberly Akimbo.
Oh, so
Um,
good.
oh, and I mean, I had to run to Broadway and see it, right? Because she's in her 60s and playing a 16-year-old and just nails it so beautifully. And they didn't just
Yeah,
take someone who was 30 and put makeup on her. Thank God.
right. Right. I think the playwright actually stipulates that. I think I saw the play years ago when it first came out. I haven't seen the musical version yet, but
Musicals
yeah, that
great.
was very specifically what it was aiming at. You had mentioned the tragic plot, and I feel like that was another big blind spot that playwrights, screenwriters have, is that when someone is old, that becomes the story. It's not just it's not just that they happen to be someone who's 70. Being 70 is the point of the story. It can never just be who they are. Right.
Right.
And to your point of this being the last ism on stage, remember back, guess who's coming to dinner, right? When the story revolved around race, right?
Hmm.
Or when the story revolves around sexual orientation, or when the story revolves around XYZ, right? That the character trait is the story. And that we evolve past that as we learn, oh, people are more than that. And age is still one of those where the age still sort of dictates the storyline they even get to have, instead of just being, I'm just a character who happens to be 70 or 80 or whatever.
Hmm.
And that's not the point of the story. That's not the point of the story.
It isn't, but I mean, it is progress since I began writing about this 25 years ago or so. It is progress that we even have main characters who are older.
Yeah.
That those stories are being told more than they used to be, and that they're being told and they're successful. Like the plays are successful. But so now there's an outgrowth of like dementia studies and also plays that revolve around dementia. Way too often those plays are still about how tragic it is that
Yes.
someone has dementia, and it is tragic for their loved ones, it is tragic for their caregivers, right? That it is all about the sadness of losing selfhood rather than the transforming selfhood that actually, is a different way of looking at someone who is living with dementia. And so at least those stories are being told. One of my favorites that I've been kind of working on lately is The Father, right? Florian Zeller's The Father, because it is finally told almost like a mystery, right? Because it's told where we don't know that the person, whether the person with dementia, we don't know what's real. Right? So it's
Right.
told really from inside that person's head. We see
Yeah.
what he sees, we experience what he experiences. So we have that same, as an audience, we have that same sense of confusion about what's going on. And it makes us angry. It ticks us off. And then we want the real answer at the end. We don't get it. We don't really, really get this explanation of everything that's happened, like tied up in a bow. So at least it's there, and it's a great acting vehicle. And for an older actor, but can it be about something besides just decay, decline, and death? It's like when they say, if you have a pregnant character, then it's all going to be about the pregnant character giving birth. It's like
Yeah.
the pregnant character is only pregnant because she's going to give birth. And Fargo came along and had a cop who was just pregnant. That's it. And she just stayed
Is having the
pregnant during
pregnant.
the whole movie, and she never gave
Yeah.
birth. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So people who are just older, they are the age they are without it being about, are they going to get sick, slip and fall, die, get dementia? What's it going to be?
Valerie, this is just so fascinating. I mean, this is something that entered my consciousness once we started working on that project, and it literally impacted how I was casting ever since.
Oh,
And
I remember running
so,
into you where we were seeing the same show, and we saw where it was not cast appropriately, and the
yep.
person was basically playing a caricature, and you and I looked at each other and we were both just appalled and embarrassed, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, you really came a long way."
Just a little bit better every day, Valerie.
Oh
As
no,
we were talking,
just
I
to have
remembered a
that
little
occur to you, yeah, to have it occur to you all on your own, right? Like you're like, oh my gosh, I get it, I get it, I get it. I'm like, yes, you sure do.
a little as we were talking, a little fun fact reoccurred to me when I saw the new Mission Impossible movie last year. Tom Cruise.
Hmm.
The little fun fact that came up is that Tom Cruise, as he was filming Mission Impossible 8, jumping off of planes, off of bridges, off of motorcycles, running along routes, he was the same age, chronological age, as Robert Brimley in Cocoon.
Yes, I remember reading that too. Right,
And
and
just
how
what a nice little like word, forces you to kind of recalibrate your assumptions. You know what I mean?
oh yes, right, and of course our assumptions are different for men than they are for women, right?
Absolutely.
Women are affected by ageism more harshly and earlier than men, which of
Oh
course is
yes.
something, since Tom Cruise is in my age group, is something that I'm very aware of, watching him continue all these years and watching the co-stars change and continue to remain the same age while he got
His
older and older.
co-stars stay the same age, right?
Those females are the same age they always were, and there's Tom
Yeah.
now, yeah. But so yes, the parts dry up. I mean, I understand
Yep.
theater is so extra ageist. It is so basic to the theater. And I think a lot of it does come from the lack of parts for older people. So little by
Yeah.
little, we're remedying that from the training that says, if you're young, you can play older, but not the other way around. From the casting, where casting directors are afraid to cast older people because they fear frailty.
Yeah.
They fear that this person won't be able to do 8 shows a week, and the sense that people don't want to buy a ticket to watch stories about older people. That part is definitely not true.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
theater has to put butts in seats. I mean, you're not going to have a successful play if people don't buy tickets and come. But the theater audience itself skews older, and they like to see themselves represented on stage and
Yeah.
accurately. And I think that's part of why the FST documentary production was so valuable, because you were putting Sarasota up on stage.
Yeah. It was literally our people. It was literally our audience
Hmm.
being reflected and represented on stage. I would love to hear some of your observations about project. You've talked a little bit about how we got on that learning curve, and we started using the right language and thinking about it in a way that was respectful and not ageist, all from the casting decisions to even the writing decisions in terms of how the story is told, who says that line as opposed to that line. But what was your experience as the expert watching us flail around and figuring it out as we went?
One of the things I really liked about your project versus some of the research-based theater that people have tried to do, that academics have tried to do, was that you were focused very evenly on representing the population accurately and on creating good theater. So often, one or the two of those is sacrificed.
Right, right.
It's of the other. And you don't have to. You can do and everything you put up on stage, everything you chose to include was not only demographically accurate, but also theoretically accurate. So you'd kind of check with us and say, hey, we're emphasizing this. Does that sort of align with what you know about the older population? Because you don't know if you're picking out something that's unusual and therefore interesting, right? So you were looking for what was representative and good theater, and you found it. I mean, yes, it was fun to watch you go through those iterations, but the more sort of like episodic and less typical narrative arc the script got, the more Brechtian is what I ended up
Yes.
writing about. The more Brechtian the script got, that and the better it was, and the more effective it was to give a range of experiences of being older without sacrificing any of the theatrical value, the entertainment value, and the thought provocation that comes along with a good project like that.
A big part of that too, Valerie, and I have to credit you and Kathy for helping me just have the courage to do this, was that so many of the people interviewed didn't agree with each other, right? And a big part of what made our plays work was that we put these characters, these composites, these true stories, true words, into conversation with each other, so that 55-year-old character X might say something and the character right next to them would be like, no, I totally disagree with that. And to let
Mm-hmm.
them not be to your homogenized, to not just blanket statement, everyone over 60 is old, right? No, I let them, we encouraged them to argue. And even when I interviewed couples, they wouldn't always agree
Oh,
based on
heck
what
yeah.
they wanted, who they were. And so that human level of messiness that would be in any other play, right? So even though the play was ostensibly about aging well in Sarasota, the goal was to make it more about these people's relationships, their personalities, and how they experienced it individually, as opposed to trying to make some blanket statement about everyone over the age of 70 believes X, Y, and Z. So not
Right.
true. So
Right.
not
And
true.
that's what you found out interviewing this huge range of people. And therefore that's what you ended up putting on stage. So, that no, you can't make blanket statements. No, you can't say everyone. I mean, and if we start to think about that with any other group of like
Right.
40 years, right? Try to tell me
Right.
everybody from 20 to 60 has the same experience. Or, we don't make those generalizations in quite the same way about other age groups. And we don't make huge age groups like 50
And
and over. I love it when, you have those check boxes. It's like, and are you 18? Are you up to 18, 18 to 24? And then you're like, I don't know, you over 50? We're just stop asking.
right. And what's so funny nowadays, I think partly because of technology, how fast it moves, the size of a generation gets shorter and shorter, right?
Hmm.
And how many of these generations resist being labeled by anyone else? Like millennials, don't you dare call me Gen Z. Gen Xers, don't you dare call me a millennial, right? It's like a battle line, hey boomer, right? I mean, they go
Well, and
after each other
okay,
now.
and let's talk ageism about okay boomer.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly ageist phrase. And people who would say okay boomer would probably embrace it and say, yes, I'm being ageist and they deserve it, right? Everybody from, born from 1945 to 1964 deserves that? Really?
Yeah.
I happen to be at the end of the baby boom myself, so I understand that whole overgeneralization. I don't. My husband is at the very, very end, and neither of us feels all that connected to the baby boom that way. But that's how we're categorized. Nevertheless, now look at how old the baby boom is. So the youngest boomers, this huge generation that has been, the elephant going through the boa constrictor all of these years. This this huge generation, the youngest ones are 60 now. And that is part of what has been transformed about narrative, right? They've always demanded attention all the way through. I can say they. Okay, we have always demanded attention all the way through the baby boom. but but now we're getting some narratives that aren't just look at the funny old person, look at the pathetic old person, right? Just this someone who's older And here they happen to have a narrative. Let's share that narrative. They're fascinating stories, fascinating characters, people who've lived 4 lifetimes, by the time they get to be 60.
Yeah.
Let's represent that fullness of humanity. Why in the world would you want to strip any story of the fullness of humanity? I don't know. I'm not that I'm passionate about it or anything.
Yeah, not that you care. Yeah. But that's one of those things too, where it definitely especially more culturally than just on stage, where that ageism goes both ways, right? It's the dismissal.
Hmm.
It's the dismissal. Whatever direction it goes, just you don't know better, or I know better than you, or you've aged past it, or well, you even haven't even gotten there yet, and just that. To your point, this refusal to even engage. That was actually part of the reason in the first place, especially Valerie, old enough to know better.
Hmm.
So that I also intentionally cast a couple young people, like in their
Hmm.
20s, to be
Hmm.
counterpoints. And sometimes they were the interviewers. We were very careful not to make it any sort of statement or any kind of judgment, but it was to what that gentleman told me. If you cast me with someone 50, that's how I feel. So it's like, let's see if we can get away with that. Let's see how we can make
And you
that.
did. You
Yeah.
did. Especially when they were talking about this is how old I feel.
Yeah.
Like it absolutely. And when I talk, I teach some non-traditional students, but a lot of my students are, at least under 30. And when I had the opportunity to teach them about aging, and ageism, all of those things, people say, how in the world can you get them interested? I'm like, because ageism affects everyone. Like, how many of them have been dismissed because they're too young? Like, oh, you can't possibly know what you're talking about. So they have experienced ageism. They just haven't really thought, most of them, about what it's like on the other end of things. To become invisible. They say women over 50, the sort of like average age of menopause, they just disappear when they're no longer, reproductively active, or seen as sexually available and appealing. Then they just disappear. And it's completely unconscious for most folks. It isn't like it's on purpose, but I notice now as I walk down the hallway, the same hallway where I have been walking for 20 years, students are more likely to bump into me than they used to be.
Wow.
They kind of, I mean, I don't move for them, and that's apparently what they unconsciously think I'm going to do. So
Yeah.
so they end up bumping into me because they think I'm going to give way, and I don't. But it's interesting to kind of to help open students' eyes to this last ism. And again, once the scales fall away from your eyes, you see it everywhere. And I have some of my alums are absolutely crusaders now about ending ageism, being aware of and ending it wherever they go, which I think is great. And of course, one of my ultimate goals.
All right, so Valerie, I usually like to wrap up with some advice and a spotlight. I'm still going to give you the spotlight, but you have such a specific knowledge base and such a fascinating background, and this has been it's been reinvigorating for me because I haven't since I left the theater, I haven't had to deal with this quite as directly. But I would love for you, from your vantage point, to tell me and the listeners what are some ways we can actually actively combat this ageism within ourselves, in our community, on our stages. What are some actual things we can do, as opposed to, I mean, awareness is step one, but what are some things I can practice, things we can actually do to move past this last ism?
I do think awareness has a great deal to do with it. It seems to me that for many people, the minute they become aware, they start taking different steps. They start to think about what they say and how they say it. Whether they are a server calling an older person sweetie,
Right.
uh, okay, or a journalist who mentions this person as a grandma. All right, and being a grandmother has absolutely nothing to do with the news. So that kind of basic awareness that we are all ageist, and not be upset about it, on an individual basis, in that we just need to acknowledge it and start working on it and do something better and just do it better every day. If you do not have a multi-generational aspect to your own life,
Mm.
if you find that almost all of your interactions are with your age cohort, whatever that might be, try to break out of that. And I don't mean you have to
Yeah.
go volunteer at a senior center, but seriously, there are many other ways, whether it's a civic group or whatever. I'm part of something called the PEO International Organization. We're a multi-generational women's group, everybody from 18 to 108. And
That's
so
wow.
so just make sure those people are part of your life. And that's good character study for writers and actors, no matter what, right? Not to just observe, but to interact with people of all generations, to really pay attention to how someone is performing age. We think of age as being performative in that it is the constant iteration of a particular performance, right? So iteration after iteration after iteration. What I do, what I say over and over and over again, all day, by minute, every day, actually creates the illusion of my age. And just as the same thing, we say the same thing about gender, right? I don't get up in the morning
Yeah.
and decide to present as female, right? But iteration after
Right.
iteration creates the illusion of my gender. It's a social construct. So is age, but we bodily age second by second. And so, we need to be aware of that social construct. Pay attention to how people are performing their age. Like, get curious about the difference between apparent age, chronological age, physiological age, and emotional age, and make that part of your study. Now, as far as other things, yes, I call people on ageism very, very politely when I hear it. I try to do I I try to do it in a joking manner. Sometimes it's most of the time it's their choice of language, their choice of
Yeah.
terminology. Sometimes it's the attitude that comes out too. And I just, you ask the question, ask them to explain themselves. You know how often asking someone to explain it just makes them stop and realize what they're doing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also highly recommend there's some great like lay people accessible to everybody resources out there. Ashton Applewhite is a leading advocate against ageism in culture. She's wonderful. She has a TEDx talk that I show my students on day one that is just like
Great.
entertaining and informative. She then has a couple of websites. She has This Chair Rocks. Isn't that,
That's
isn't that a
good.
great, that's a great title. And Old School, she's got a clearinghouse called Old School. All of those have great anti-ageism resources in them. And, so those kinds of things, I think. Sure, you could, if you're interested in theater and you want to take a look at how contemporary plays and modern plays and all kinds of things have characterized age and get into it, I absolutely would encourage you to take a look at some of my publications, but because they do just analyze plays and productions
Awesome.
and age and ageism. So we have now, if we finally do have a few critics out there, scholars out there who are specializing in age and theater, and I'm really excited about the work they're doing. And most of it is very accessible to, to just lay readers as well. We try not to get too heavily theoretical, as you can tell by
Yeah. Not
the way I'm.
not too far up the ivory tower.
No, no, it's not about that. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, great. You kind of beat me to it, but yeah, spotlight time. So I took notes there. I'm going to put all those links into the show so people can find them. But tell us a little bit about you, Valerie, in terms of what you have coming up. You mentioned the big publication, but where can people find? Do you have a website? Are you on the socials? Where can people find out more about you, follow you, read you?
It's easiest, actually. The university maintains a web page that has
Mm.
my scholarship, all of my publications, pretty close to up to date. Google
Oh,
Scholar is
great.
actually really good for that kind of like how to find me that way. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those kinds of things, mostly for fun. I don't do an awful lot of professional things on the social media sites, but I have an account on all of them at least. But yeah, it's easy enough to find me through the university. What's up next? Let's see. I just had fun things changed very, very quickly this weekend. But I just had fun getting invited to contribute to a forum about presidential age. It's a very hot topic
Oh,
right now. Age,
yeah.
ageism, and our assumptions about age, frailty, and that abyss that you fall into apparently when you turn 80. I just for an online journal called Age Culture Humanities. So I just contributed to a forum about performing presidential age there.
Wow.
Like I said, since Biden just dropped out, that whole conversation changes really, really quickly.
Yeah, it's
But
changing in real time right now. Yeah.
it really is. But when we're talking about performance versus performative, right? Who's performing age and but actually performatively for real? What are the iterations of what these two presidential candidates could do? That was anyway, that was really fun to write about. And there's a great forum with really great academics, again, very accessible age studies content that can help you kind of think through what some of the issues are having to do with ageism. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing now.
Yeah, before you go back to the classroom this fall.
Yes, yes, and I know I've got another chapter coming out in an academic book next year that I'm really excited about because I wrote about my experience in a local community theater production. So I did look, and this is several years back. Once I was an empty nester, I thought maybe I can just go back and do a little theater. I haven't done any acting in what, 26 years, something like that. I'd gone 26, 28 years, something like that without acting. I was like, oh, maybe let's go do a little community theater. This will be fun. So I showed up at age 56 and into a community theater. I went someplace where nobody knows me. I did that on purpose, right? Because
Mhm.
it wasn't going to be the professor walking in. And
Right.
instead, it's like, I don't know, here's this woman. And I got cast as the ingenue in this play, in an ingenue
Awesome.
role designated as the ingenue. And they didn't have anybody who was 22 show up. So he decided to make it work with the people he had. So there I was. There were age appropriate parts, but I didn't get cast in one of those. I got cast as the ingenue. So I wrote about what that was like, right?
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
was I expected to pass for being that young? And that my love interest was over 20 years younger than I was. And how weird did that feel when we were supposed to be in the same age and just so so yeah, that'll be coming out, I hope, sometime next year. But I thought, wow, this is obviously an opportunity to journal my way and do an autoethnography of this experience.
Oh, what a great place to land, Valerie. My goodness. Thank you so much for time and sharing all of this. And everyone, again, I'll have all that stuff in the show notes. Valerie, I know you're on sabbatical, so you had some open time. I appreciate you squeezing me in here.
Happy to. Do I not get to give you my advice?
Oh, you know what? I wasn't going to force you to, but if you want
Oh,
to, I am more than open to it.
but now you've had me think about it, right? You're like,
Okay.
here are things to think about.
All right.
Okay,
So
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 ask me
what's
my
the best
best
advice you've ever taken? Yeah.
the best advice I've ever taken. I had to think about this one. Go where the path is made straight.
Go where the path is made straight.
Now that is not take the easy way out or take the easy path. That is paying attention to what's going on in the universe around you and whatever it is you seek. Where is the path being made straight?
Hmm.
Where are things falling into place for you? And go that way, right? Ask for it, but then pay attention and go that way. As opposed to standing over here and beating your head against the wall about something you want or something you thought should happen or the way it ought to be. Or I'm just going to do what's easiest, but there will be a way that the path is made straight. Also, I tend to be a bit of a
Cool.
perfectionist, which there's there's risk aversion involved in being a perfectionist. Okay.
Oh, truth. Oh, that's so
Okay.
true.
Okay. So it's hard to take risks if you think you actually have to end up perfect. So there were a couple things that really helped me when it had to do with that. One was a professor who would say, don't worry, the stakes are so low. Like, we get ourselves all worked up. But the thing I ended up having a magnet on my refrigerator for was, since failure is such a big deal, right? When you're a perfectionist, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?
Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah.
That one actually mattered to me because I that was when I was having to publish or perish, and there was a chance I
Right.
could. And if you fail, you get fired. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and my nephew, of course, immediately said, "Wow, I would attempt to fail." I'm like, "Not funny. I'm being serious here."
Well,
So,
that was
those are some of the
that
best pieces of advice I've taken.
that was worth it. That was totally worth it.
Now,
Oh,
worst advice I've ever given is on a quick level. It was probably, hey, the pandemic's just getting underway. Probably shouldn't buy real estate right now. I mean, the market's really, really volatile and it could really tank. So you might want to wait on buying real estate. Ha! But the other one is really the flip side of being risk averse. And on an existential level, it would be the advice to be careful. There are times when it is not a good idea to be careful in that particular way. So that's the worst advice I've ever given, along the flip side of the best advice I ever took.
that first one hits home. We bought our house just before and put our pool in just before all the things went nuts. And yeah, no, that was probably some really bad advice you gave.
Well, that volatility, my gosh, but nope,
Yeah.
nope,
Oh
nope,
yeah.
nope. All those folks who decided to buy right then and can flip it anyway, but that's just practical.
Valerie, it's been such a delight to catch up, and just wishing you all the best, all these publications. And thank you so much for taking the time today. Really provocative and important stuff. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Jason. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The Page and Stage podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the episode summaries. If you enjoyed and found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.